Godzilla. This icon of cinema, whose signature style includes slow plotting, a thirst for mass city destruction, shooting atomic rays from his mouth, and of course, beating the absolute shit out of his co-stars, has had a franchise that has spanned 70 years with over 30 movies and countless other media. Through 4 eras of films, this amazing character and his cohorts are instantly recognisable the world over and have given people some truly memorable moments in cinema. So it's no surprise, of course, that he's more than dipped his claw into the realm of video games and across multiple genres of gaming at that. I decided to dive into my collection and see how some of these games hold up. Starting with the Nintendo Entertainment System, we have Godzilla Monster of Monsters. Published by Toho and first released in Japan in 1988, the story here is set in the year 2000 XXX. How bloody lazy is that? They couldn't even decide on a date, so they play it off as if to say that as long as you play it in the year 2000 something, it'll be the current year date. Anyway, the story has Earth being invaded by aliens from Planet X, which has popped up near Pluto, and they're using monsters as their primary attack force. Godzilla and Mothra rally in aid of Earth and attempt to fight their way through the army of monsters on different planets until they reach Planet X. Now, if that doesn't sound like a wacky 70s sci-fi movie, I don't know what does. And it's completely bonkers. Like, how would Godzilla even travel through space? Is he farting wormholes or something? Anyway, upon starting this game, you see a hexagonal grid representing planet Earth, and with all the hexes featuring a coloured icon, and some monster pieces on either side of the grid. It really resembles a board game, and at first glance one couldn't be faulted for thinking that they're playing Godzilla chess or something. In fact, the game is really rather interesting as it incorporates several different gameplay genres which work really well together. So the way this game is played, the player alternates taking turns with the CPU. The player has control of Godzilla and Mothra, and the CPU starts off managing 2 monsters of their own, Gazora and Mugira. On the player turn, you select a monster and move them into spaces towards the opponent. This gives it a very real-time strategy or board game vibe, but very quickly after finishing their movement, the game transitions to a side-scrolling action game where the player has to move their monster through levels based on the very spaces they move through. It's here that you first notice the differences in playstyle between Godzilla and Mothra. Each has a life bar, power bar, standard attack, and special attack, which takes a bit of getting used to. But they also move differently and are better suited to different parts of the game. For instance, Mothra flies, she's faster, and can more easily navigate the level stages and enemies located there. While Godzilla may be slower, he does have more attack options than Mothra, and he's better suited for monster battles, being able to lay a ton of damage with his atomic ray. Both monsters are able to level up throughout the game, usually by defeating other monsters, which increases their life and power bars. Once they've successfully navigated the level stages, the CPU gets to move one of their monsters before it's back to the player's turn. Players can opt to use the same monster every turn if they wish, but both monsters need to exit through the station on the other side, and the difficulty ramps up on later planets, so I'd recommend alternating with each monster. Whenever a monster ends their turn in a space adjacent to an opposing monster, the option for a battle will occur following the level stages if it was on the player's turn. And here the game transitions again, this time to a 1 vs 1 fighting game. Each battle gives you only 40 seconds to either defeat or do as much damage to the opposing monster as possible before being taken back to the grid and continuing on. During the battles, the monster controls exactly the same as the level stages, which makes for a near seamless genre switch. The 40-second timer might not seem like much, but there is a situation not uncommon that can occur where the opposing monster can pin you against the back wall, and whilst there, you are at their mercy and about as effective as my Nana trying to arm wrestle Chuck Norris. And when they decide not to let up, that short timer couldn't end fast enough. but if you manage to damage the opposing monster when battle ends, they'll retain some of that damage and can be fought again with diminished health. This can lead to a bit of a strategy here, as you can attempt to lure opposing monsters into spaces between Godzilla and Mothra, allowing for the option of having one battle after another without going through level stages. The level stages can look fucking crazy, with numerous enemy fire seemingly from every direction like a typical bullet hell game. And you're not exactly small on the screen either, and as if that wasn't enough, half the time you can't even tell where enemies are or what's attacking you. Like this volcano for instance. It looks like it's background scenery in the far off distance, but no shit, the fucking thing spits out fireballs and they're able to hit you. To the undiscerning eye, enemies in this game can almost be literally anything, from spaceships and weird aliens to rock walls and volcanoes. Even the fucking plants have had enough of your shit. But the fun fact here is that everything in this game is derived from Toho Studio's own film catalogue. For instance, the cuttlefish monster Godzilla is actually from the 1970 movie Space Amoeba. This particular version of Mogira is actually from the 1957 film The Mysterians, along with this satellite dish weapon, the Markalite Cannon. This small insignificant looking spaceship is actually the Super X from Return of Godzilla, the most recent Godzilla film at the time. Even this weird mushroom thing actually has its own movie called Matango. The game is riddled with fan service, which only adds more enjoyment for fans of Toho's films. Now Godzilla and Mothra can take a fair few hits, but the player should be wary as getting caught in the wrong spot can mean sudden death. It's also not uncommon for Godzilla or Mothra to get stuck, as some blocking enemies have specific vulnerable spots that aren't obvious, and some enemy attacks can even cause knockback and halt advancement until they're dealt with. With so much on-screen flying in all directions, which is to make each level a challenge for either monster, this can cause the game to chug and flicker as it tries to process everything at once. Once both Godzilla and Mothra have exited the planet, they move on to the next planet, and there the grid will be different and the previously encountered monsters will have returned along with the addition of another monster. Once the player makes it all the way to the end, level 7, they can look forward to fighting every monster in the game before taking on King Ghidorah as the final boss. This approach of each planet adding the previous monsters plus one extra monster does pad out the game significantly, and can feel really tedious as you're spending a decent portion of game time fighting those early monsters again and again and again. However, this approach does give the game the feeling of movies like Destroy All Monsters with its multi-monster brawls and rivalries. Given the length of the game, it was a great choice on the developer's part to include a password system that can instantly take you to the start of any particular planet. The only issue here is, did they have to make the password so bloody long? Seriously, it's fucking painful to have to enter in these long ass passwords on an NES controller. It's also more painful if you finish a password and realized you entered it incorrectly, as you can't simply go back to the mistake and correct it. Instead, you need to delete everything up to the mistake and re-enter the rest of the password again. The game looks great for the 8-bit era, with all monsters, especially Godzilla and Mothra, getting some gorgeous sprite work that makes them instantly recognizable. The animation work, particularly on Godzilla, stands out, but it's a bit odd that he gets multiple frames of animation for things like his tail attack, but doesn't get a single frame for when he's jumping, so he appears as if he's standing in mid-air. The music is also really good, instantly recognizable, and even a little catchy. This game was actually my first ever introduction to the character of Godzilla and the other monsters, and whilst it's not the best game in this list, I certainly appreciate it more now than I ever have before. As a single player experience, the game can get a bit laborious at times, especially since you can only make progress by getting both monsters to the exit of each planet and the repeating boss fights. However, one area where the game really shines is when it's a two-player experience. Playing through this game with a friend and each of you playing a specific monster and taking turns makes it much more of an enjoyable experience and takes away some of that tedium as you both share the workload when it comes to boss fights. Next up, we have an entry on Nintendo Game Boy, simply titled Godzilla. Released in 1990, this game is actually a port of the Japanese game called Godzilla-kun, which is also a port of a game released in 1985 for the MSX computer system. This time, Godzilla is smashing his way into the puzzle game genre, and I have to admit this genre is not what first comes to mind when I think of a Godzilla game, but here we are. First off, look at the title card. This is on Game Boy. I think it's amazing they got such detail in an image on this handheld system. I mean, yeah, Godzilla's face is a bit fucked up, but still he's there in movie shot accuracy. And it's not just that, each of the other monsters in this game get these great screen captures too. They look lifted straight from the movies. And then, this is what the game looks like. Like, what the fuck happened? Seriously, what a transition to go from these beautifully detailed screenshots to this minimalist chibi art style. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just, wouldn't you be a bit disappointed to buy this game back in the day and see the great screenshots that it opens with and then you're met with the gameplay graphics? Anyway, the story of this game centers around Godzilla trying to free his son Manila, who's being kidnapped by the other monsters. Manila is being held in a maze that is filled with rooms, each of which is a puzzle that needs to be cleared in order to progress. Godzilla starts the game in the top left corner of the maze, and each puzzle room requires him to destroy every boulder in the room in order to make the room's exit appear. Some levels open up multiple exits where the player has to choose their path, as each exit takes Godzilla to a different room in the maze. Godzilla's abilities are limited to being able to move left and right, climb up and down vines and ladders, and a single punch attack. Yeah, no atomic ray this time. When Godzilla punches a boulder, he pushes it one space in the direction he's facing, and if he punches it when it can't move back, the boulder crumbles. It sounds simple enough, and indeed it can be, however it can also be quite challenging to figure out how to go about smashing the boulders in each room. The task is made all the more difficult as all the other monsters come pouring into the level with the sole purpose of taking you out. Each monster enters the room through one or more doors in quick succession and try and navigate their way to Godzilla. They can also hurt Godzilla just from making contact with him, and if not careful, the player can suddenly find themselves sandwiched in and health rapidly dwindling, so pay attention to his health bar and lives in the bottom right corner. Each enemy behaves in different ways and pose their own unique threat and obstacle to Godzilla. For example, Rodan ignores all terrain and objects and simply flies straight to Godzilla. And Anguirus speeds up when on the same level or plane as Godzilla. But Godzilla is not defenseless. He's packing a giant mega fist. I mean, look at it. It's the size of him. Like he got one of those giant novelty foam hands or something. Anyway, usually one punch is sufficient to defeat an enemy and send them away. However, they don't stay away for very long and soon come back through the door ready to go again. Some monsters, like Hedorah, can't even be hurt by Godzilla's attack, and instead can only be dealt with by other means. There are also some random pickup items as well that can grant more lives, freeze enemies in place for a short time, or knock out all enemies on the screen. The game also features its own password system, which is of great help as this is not a quick game to get through. But just to confuse you, it has 2 separate password entries and no explanation without the game manual. So let me explain. Password 4 is only 4 digits and will take you to the desired level of your choice. Password 18 is 18 digits long and does the same thing, but the big difference here, other than the horrendously long password problem, is that it will have saved your progress through the maze up to the level whose code you are entering. So in short, if you're wanting to just play certain puzzles, use password 4. If you're wanting to progress through the game, use password 18. This game came as a bit of a surprise to me, as neither the gameplay nor art style are what you'd expect for a Godzilla game. And although it's just a simple puzzle game, the idea of having the puzzle rooms as part of the grander maze gives it that extra element that can keep players coming back and makes it even more enjoyable as you try to find your way to the final stage. The chibi art style is rather cute, and I love how spot on some of those chibi sprites are. It's not without its frustrations though, as most of the rooms can only be beaten one specific way, and often there are puzzles that require precise placements, such as punching rocks over gaps without falling down, or hanging partially from a vinyl ladder. There's also the added frustration of being crushed by rocks if you stand too close to a tower of rocks that you're punching at. I surprisingly enjoyed this game once I understood it, and for me it reminded me of times as a kid where I was stuck in the car on a long journey with my parents and had a lot of time to kill. I just would have needed a lot of batteries. And a notepad and pen. Jumping back to the NES, we have Godzilla 2: War of the Monsters. This game is the sequel to the NES Godzilla game, Monster of Monsters. However, despite what the name suggests, it actually has nothing to do with its predecessor, either in story or in gameplay. Also, this game was only ever released in North America in 1992, not even having a release in Japan. As a bit of a change from the first two, this game sees the player controlling the human military against computer-controlled monsters and aliens in a turn-based strategy game. Featuring multiple scenarios, the story and main objective of each scenario is simply centered around responding to and defeating the monster threats. Upon starting the game, the player is immediately met with a mission select screen and can choose any level to play in any order. Looks like they finally had enough of entering those long passwords. The gameplay is eerily akin to games like Advance Wars, where the player is presented with a gridded map of an area and is given a selection of units to use on their turn to move and attack monsters. They also have use of several key buildings that can provide different benefits. All the scenarios have different layouts and monsters, but with the same premise, with monsters attempting to destroy certain buildings on the map, and if they manage to do just that, the player loses the mission. On the computer turn, monsters simply journey towards their objectives, destroying buildings and player units along the way. Sometimes they'll change form or enter the game partway through a mission just to keep you on your toes. Players get to move and attack with units, produce more units from buildings, receive intel on how to win the scenario, or even build a super weapon. There is lots of depth to uncover in this game, as it appears simple and intuitive. However, managing your forces in the most efficient way takes practice, as units each have a task they're best suited to, their own stats, abilities, and weapons. For example, the trailer is used for transporting immovable units or unit parts. The radar car, if positioned close enough, can be used to reveal hidden monsters on the map, and tanks are best at shooting ground monsters as opposed to flying monsters. When the player selects a unit, they can move it X amount of spaces based on the type of unit and terrain, and upon ending an attack unit's movement adjacent to a monster, they get the option to attack or hold their ground. There can be a lot of fun here as you try to strategically place your units to slow a monster's advance, or completely surround them for the opportunity to attack multiple times. But a key element to strategy in this game is knowing when to attack and when to retreat and repair, as there is a hard limit to the number and type of units available in any scenario. The nature of positioning your units to coordinate attacks really does feel like the movies, where forces are put into position to try halt the advance of a monster. It's also accurate to the movies when you have a single unit that's just at the mercy of a giant monster. combat is mostly straightforward, as the game transitions into what resembles an RPG screen, where you're given further stat details of the monster and unit, such as life points, defense points, and movement points. The attacker gets to attack first, and the defender attacks second, provided they're still alive. So before an attack commences, you get to select the weapon the unit is using, as some have multiple options. For instance, the tank has guns and its cannon, and as you might expect, the guns are more accurate but do less damage than the cannon. This aspect adds more depth and strategy to the game, which feels quite impressive for the time. But following this, in what feels like a weird and random design choice, is the appearance of a slot machine rapidly rolling different icons. It feels disjointed and just interrupts that natural flow of selecting your weapon and using it. Now I have an idea of how Two-Face must feel having to flip a stupid coin before he can shoot anyone. Anyway, so you hit the A button to stop each slot on a symbol, but there's practically no point hitting the button for each slot as they spin so fast that unless you have super speed, you can't possibly time your selections by hitting A at the right moment. So what do these symbols do exactly? Well, if you don't have the manual or look it up on the internet, you wouldn't know, as there is no on-screen tutorial and there's such a mix of different icons in different colours. So let me break down what all this means. The symbols are divided into two colours, blue which benefits the player and red which benefits the monsters. So as the player, you're wanting blue icons to appear. If you roll two of a matching icon, both type and colour, it will grant a certain bonus for the unit or monster. For example, rolling two of these targets will grant the player an increase to accuracy, but if you roll two red versions of the same icon, it will grant that bonus to the monster. Luckily, on the rare occasion you manage to roll three of the same icon, regardless of the colour, all the bonuses of the different icons will be applied to the player. After the symbols have been rolled, an animation of the attack will play out and show you the outcome, whether it was a hit or miss, and how much damage was incurred. Keep in mind though, even if you rolled a bonus to deal extra damage, for example, it has no bearing on whether or not the unit or monster actually hits its target. After both attacks, it's back to the map view. Besides using units, you can access several different types of buildings for different results. For example, the air and army bases house additional units that can be deployed onto the field. The Space Center has scientists that can grant advice on how to tackle the scenario, and the laboratory can deploy special units that are incredibly effective. Also, if you position an injured unit on top of designated buildings, they can slowly be repaired to full life points. Once the final monster's been defeated, the scenario is completed and the players return to the mission select screen. The graphics and sprite work in this game are good, particularly with how well the units and monsters are done during the combat screen. Although the game is fun, its main criticism is it's really quite difficult, particularly when it comes to fighting the monsters with your units. Unlike in similar games where you can generate income and perpetually deploy units, this game has a set number of units in every mission, and that's it. Once your last unit is destroyed, the mission is bust. This is further made challenging with there being no guarantees of your attacks actually hitting the monsters, and the potential added trouble of rolling double red icons during the combat slot machine. Hence the importance of attack and retreat tactics. It's also easy for the player to make mistakes by hitting the wrong button that can cost them the mission. For example, the first level features the A-bomb, which can be used to lure Godzilla into a trap with another weapon. However, if you accidentally use the A-bomb while transporting it, it can detonate, and that's an instant fail as you obliterate yourself. The game doesn't have a multiplayer feature, which could have added a lot of extra fun with a friend controlling their own group of monsters, so it kind of feels a bit like a missed opportunity. But despite that, I always enjoy giving this game a go and doing a little better each time I do. And it's probably the only game on this list that I would absolutely say needs a modern day remake. Now we move into the 16-bit era with the Super Nintendo's Super Godzilla. Just listen to that 16-bit Godzilla theme. That's a fucking banging track right there. And once I hear that, I can't wait to jump into this game. Released in 1993 in Japan and 94 in North America, this one is an action and strategy game. However, I often consider it as being a Godzilla simulator, as it's designed to replicate the look and feel of the movies, particularly from the 80s and 90s Heisei era. Set in the year 1990X, damn, they love their non-specific dates, don't they? Japan is being invaded by aliens who have orchestrated attacks on different cities using different monsters. The humans, using a mind control operation box, have control of Godzilla and send him to intercept each of the monsters. The objective of each of the 6 levels is to navigate Godzilla around the city, pick up items, and face off against the enemy monsters terrorizing the city. In some bizarre twist of irony, this more film-accurate Godzilla game barely sees the player in control of Godzilla himself. For the most part, the player actually controls a tiny blue, insignificant-looking dot. When the player enters each level, they're presented with a screen shown in 2 halves. The bottom half is a gridded section or region of the city, and the top half depicts Godzilla in beautiful 16-bit graphics. The thing is though, the top half of the screen is actually just there for something pretty to look at, like a perpetual in-game cutscene. The bottom map is where the player needs to focus their attention, as Godzilla is represented by a blue dot that keeps moving. The map screen also holds important information like Godzilla's energy, which is his health, how much time is left to complete the level, and how far away the opposing monster is in grid spaces. The player can alter the direction the blue dot is heading, and doing so will change the angle or view of Godzilla on the screen above. See, the top screen of Godzilla plays out whatever Godzilla happens to be doing on the map. For instance, if he steps on a mine, the screen above depicts the mine going off and he loses a portion of his energy. Or if Godzilla comes into contact with buildings, it shows him smashing them down. It's really an interesting combination that is really effective at giving that movie feel, as the top screen changes to always reflect the environment Godzilla is in or moving through. However, it can get almost seizure-inducing if the player frequently changes directions. Godzilla's movement speed changes depending on if he's moving through different levels of water or on land, and there are numerous things on the map to watch out for. Small buildings and small mountains can be destroyed to clear a path, while large buildings and large mountains force him to find alternative routes. Blue spheres on the map that aren't water allow Godzilla to replenish his energy. The yellow spaces are either items or portals to other locations in the city. The items consist of healing items, defense and attack increases, and even temporary invulnerability. There are also enemies like alien ships and even military forces in the form of tanks, mines and artillery, which will attack Godzilla if he gets too close. Which does actually beg the question, if the humans are controlling him, why are they also attacking him? Anyway, this game has a lot of connections to the films, from the design and look of the monsters, the human characters who provide you with valuable information, and the locations where you fight specific monsters. Hell, even just walking looks straight out of the films. When Godzilla moves into the space occupied by an alien ship or monster, the game transitions into a fighting game, and the screens change to depict Godzilla and his opponent on the top screen, with their energy, fighting spirit, and Godzilla's own attack on the bottom screen. However, combat in this game can be difficult. Scratch that, it's bloody shit, as unlike other Godzilla games, the combat here isn't straightforward. The player has direct control over Godzilla this time, being able to move him left and right on the top screen, and he even has a punch attack and block. The thing that sets this game apart though is that the combat is not about fighting, it's about rhythm, and I've got as much rhythm as a zombie playing Dance Dance Revolution. Each side has a fighting spirit bar in the middle of the screen, and as each side moves back and forth, the bar grows and recedes in rapid succession. The goal being for Godzilla to raise his bar as much as he can and then strike his opponent once close enough to create an attack window. Upon striking his enemy, Godzilla needs to move back to the left away from the opponent, and as he does, the attack window in the lower center of the screen will cycle through different attack options for Godzilla. Once the desired attack is depicted, hit the attack button again and Godzilla will enter a cinematic style cutscene where he delivers the attack. The higher the bar is when Godzilla strikes the opponent, the greater the possibility for more powerful attacks. However, the attack window is short and Godzilla can miss an opportunity to attack if not quick enough. The opposing monster will build their own fighting spirit and can unleash their own unique attacks against Godzilla and even knock him back. It doesn't sound so bad, but each opposing monster will force Godzilla to move in a certain rhythm in order for him to land hits. For example, King Ghidorah is the very first boss, and Godzilla just needs to move forward and strike him when he can. However, that same tactic won't work on monsters like Mechagodzilla, who unleashes numerous attacks if Godzilla consistently moves forward, backwards, or not at all. In this instance, it's best for Godzilla to repeatedly just edge forward a bit at a time in order to avoid being attacked and to get close enough to unleash his own attacks. And all monsters are like this, requiring Godzilla to figure out their own specific rhythms. It's not just that which makes the combat system here so difficult. It's also that the opposing monsters don't follow the same rules of combat as Godzilla. See, the opposing monsters can seemingly trigger any of their attacks whenever they like, regardless of their fighting spirit or if they even struck Godzilla or not. And they tend to do so rapidly, with it being common to have Godzilla being hit by 3 separate attacks before he's able to get close enough just to hit them with one. Enemies can also be invulnerable to most attacks of Godzilla's, limiting him to only being able to use specific attacks during certain monster fights. In short, they're cheating bastards. Due to combat being so damn harsh, it's vital in this game to fill all 4 of Godzilla's inventory slots with items for monster battles. Towards the end of the game, Godzilla's able to be upgraded to the original titular monster, Super Godzilla, a vastly more powerful monster who has more attacks, more energy, and deals way more damage. Interestingly, Super Godzilla's design directly inspired that of Space Godzilla, whose movie would be released only a year later. The final leg of the game sees Super Godzilla face off against another original monster, Bagan, who has one hell of a fight in store for the player as he's no pushover and not adverse to using dirty tricks. In a change up from previous games, there's no password system and no level select, forcing the player to complete the game in one sitting. Although the Japanese version has a cheat code to skip levels, that only seems to work in that specific version of the game. Speaking of the Japanese release, it's interesting to note in that version of the game, Mechagodzilla is actually Mechagodzilla 2 from the '93 film Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, whereas the US version of this game has Mechagodzilla from the 1970s. And this is due to the simple fact that the movie Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 had not yet been released in the United States at that time. The graphics in this game look awesome, but can be a bit hit and miss, with the cutscenes really nailing these monsters and their attacks. It's a shame they just couldn't replicate the cutscene monster graphics into the combat sequence graphics, as the designs here just aren't good. I mean, Godzilla looks like all he's done is leg day at the gym, and Mechagodzilla has just let out his pants after scoffing an entire Christmas dinner. The gameplay outside of combat really doesn't seem like much, but coupled with the music, the slow plotting, and the dual screens, it really helps it encapsulate the look and feel of the movies. And it's a real testament to how good the rest of the game is despite how horrid the combat system is. It's a really good Godzilla game and one of my favourite Godzilla games. I just wish it had a combat system more akin to the original NES Godzilla game. Finally, we have our first fighting game entry here with Godzilla Kaijuu Daikessen. Translated to mean Godzilla Great Monster Battle, this Japan-only release from 1994 is actually a sequel to a Turbo Duo and Turbo Graphics CD game called Godzilla Battle Legends, which featured a much more extensive cast of playable characters than its Super Famicom sequel. An English language version of this game was planned and advertised under the title Godzilla Destroy All Monsters. However, this never eventuated, and at best we can see a partially translated version here. This is a simple 1 vs 1 fighting game, and straight off the bat, this game looks fantastic! From the level scenery to its cast of iconic monsters, all beautifully done in 16-bit graphics and looking straight out of the films. I mean, just look at them. Where were these sprites a year ago with Super Godzilla? After starting the main mode, each monster is shown with their own stats during character selection. Not that anyone can understand what's written there if they don't read Japanese. Also, as a nice touch, each monster's name is depicted in gorgeous Japanese characters similar to their movie fonts. In what is similar to Street Fighter 2, upon selecting a monster, the player is shown a map of Japan along with the remaining monsters. However, the player gets to select the order in which they battle each of those monsters. After selecting your opponent, both monsters' names appear in massive lettering for a very movie-esque versus title card just before the match starts, complete with ominous music. As you might expect, each monster has their own specific level and musical theme, and in a great show of fan service, each of their levels is based on a setting depicted from that monster's respective movie. Hell, even the monsters' themes are taken from their movie as well. Just listen to this 16-bit rendition of Mothra's theme. Godzilla is the only exception here, as whilst he does have his iconic theme, he has no level of his own, and instead appears in the level of the player's chosen monster. Gameplay here is pretty much standard fare for a fighting game, with two monsters going head to head in a best of two format. Each of the monsters when fighting is able to run, hold, and use light and heavy attacks. Monsters also have a variety of special attacks unique to themselves that often require quarter circle movements on the D-pad followed by a light or heavy attack. They also each have one or two wrath attacks which inflict massive damage and as such can only be triggered by monsters that have taken enough damage to fill their rage meter that's located at the bottom of the screen. For most monsters, these wrath attacks are often triggered by the exact same button input, despite each attack being so unique. As should be the case, each of the monsters feels different to play as from one another, and it can take a bit of time to get used to each one. For example, Anguirus is the only monster that doesn't have a projectile attack, and so he needs to get in close to inflict damage. Biollante is so fucking big that it isn't even able to jump. And Mothra, well, she flies. One aspect of the game I have never seen before is how it manages throw and grab attacks. Traditionally, in other fighting games, a player would press one or two buttons to execute a grab or throw attack, and possibly with the additional direction input to send the opponent in a specific direction. Here though, a grab or throw attack is done in the same manner as a special attack, using a specific set of direction inputs followed by pressing the hold button. In this manner, players are able to execute multiple different types of throws and even close quarter grab attacks. The controls in this game are clunky and can sometimes feel downright unresponsive, particularly if you're trying to pull off a last second wrath attack that could make or break the match. However, one could argue that the slow clunkiness of the controls fits in perfectly with the theme of the game. I mean, if the controls were as tight and refined as Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat, gameplay would probably be a bit more fast-paced, and before you know it, the slow lumbering Godzilla is pulling off backflips, hurricane kicks, and dodging attacks like he's Neo from the Matrix. Once the player has defeated all 7 playable monsters, they're then greeted by one of 3 potential boss monsters for the game's final fight. The 3 final bosses include Mechagodzilla 2, who is the easiest of the 3, but still packs a wallop, and he's much more difficult than most of the playable monsters. Then there is Super Mechagodzilla, who is essentially just Mechagodzilla 2, but with the addition of his Garuda back unit, which is able to detach from him and assist in battles, and even provides him with a couple of extra moves. And lastly, there is the Gauten, which is one of the numerous flying submarine-esque super weapons that Toho have used in several of their films. A bit of an odd choice, but hey, it's in there. Now, it would have been a travesty if they hadn't included a multiplayer feature in this game, but they most certainly did. In multiplayer, players are greeted with not only the 8 initial monsters from the main game, but are also able to play as Mechagodzilla 2. Not only that, upon beating the game and sitting through to the end of the credit scroll, players are given a code, and if input correctly at the title screen, they're then granted access to play as Super Mechagodzilla and the Gauten, but only in multiplayer. And as standard with fighting games, players are also able to set up the match by selecting the stage, setting the time limit and strength of their monsters as a sort of a handicap feature. This game seriously looks the business, and those character sprites are just amazing. It's great seeing Godzilla and his ilk in a proper 2D fighting game, and one that really tries its hardest to recreate those classic battles from the films. Controls are a bit clunky, and it can get frustrating to pull off certain special moves, especially the wrath attacks. Whilst not great, it's a decent and solid fighting game, and it's such a shame that it never made it to Western audiences until the days of emulators and ROMs. Here we go as the Game Boy Advance jumps into the fray with Godzilla Domination. Released in 2002, this is another fighting game. However, it drops the traditional one-on-one side view format and instead uses an isometric view and can have up to 4 monsters fighting at the same time. It also adopts a colourful cartoony style of graphics as opposed to the more film-accurate graphics of previous games. This game's story centres around an enigmatic meteor called Meteor X. And there it is again! I mean, at this point, each game should just say Godzilla is brought to you by the letter X. Anyway, the meteor has appeared above Tokyo 2, no idea what happened to Tokyo 1, and started sending out weird psychic waves that make all the monsters go nuts, apart from, and you guessed it, the one the player picks. Wow, and I have to say, I'm kind of impressed how they're just recycling the plots of previous games now, despite nearly 50 years of material they could be drawing from. But is the plot so important when it comes to monster bashing action? Yeah, maybe not, but it would be nice. Anyway, when entering the main story mode, the player is given a choice of 6 monsters: Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Rodan, Mechagodzilla, Mothra, and Megalon. Each showing their own stats reflecting how effective they are with speed, power, and specials. And once the player character is selected, the player is then in for a series of 8 battles. Each of these battles simply involves defeating the enemy monsters, but it's not always a free-for-all, as the icon preceding each battle shows the player what to expect. For instance, battles can be 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, free-for-all, or 1 versus 3. The latter of these can actually be quite challenging depending on the monster the player picks, the difficulty setting of the game, and the player's skill level. Before a battle starts, players are given a versus screen that shows which monsters they are fighting against and or with. Then the players dropped into the fight and off they go. Monsters have access to 2 main attacks, as well as blocking, jumping, and the ability to throw stunned monsters. The main attacks can be charged up for special attacks, and they can even be used mid-air following a jump. Like the previous game I mentioned, monsters have a rage meter that builds up by blocking attacks and destroying buildings. As the rage meter fills, monsters are able to unleash additional special attacks which vary in strength by hitting certain pairs of buttons together. It's easy to learn each monster's moveset, and all attacks are unique for each monster. Levels are really colourful and can depict different cities, locations on Earth, and even locations in space. There are also numerous buildings scattered around the levels that monsters can freely destroy just by moving onto them. Some of these buildings also drop various power-ups. The larger buildings in the game can't be crushed by walking into them, but after 3 hits, monsters are then able to pick up the building and hurl it at the nearest pain in the ass monster. The power-ups range from being helpful to being a big hindrance, with some filling your health or rage meters, others giving a temporary boost to speed or jumping, and others instead being detrimental as they can temporarily prevent you from attacking, slow you down, or even reverse your controls. Enemies that walk onto the power-up will receive its bonus as well, but luckily this also applies to the negative bonuses. There are also 2 bonus stages during the game where the player is given the opportunity to score some extra points. The first bonus stage has multiple waves of UFOs appearing on the screen, and the player is tasked with trying to destroy them all before they leave the screen. Colliding with them does not count. The second bonus stage features waves of fighter jets passing back and forth from left to right. All the player needs to do here is avoid all the fighters in each wave to score points. Upon making it to the 8th battle, the player is greeted with a 1 versus 1 boss fight against Mecha King Ghidorah, who's like 3 times the player's size and weirdly much bigger than even King Ghidorah. The boss does take a bit of time to figure out a winning strategy because, as you'd expect, Mecha King Ghidorah does a ton of damage, flings you around like a rag doll, and the opportunities to damage him are very short, and in total he takes an average of 32 hits to bring down. Upon beating him, the game ends and players are greeted with their total score for the game and the ending for their specific monster, encouraging repeat playthroughs with different monsters to see all the endings. There are also other game modes than story mode. Versus mode requires the linking of multiple Game Boy Advance consoles with 1 per player and has 2 different modes. Single pack mode, where only 1 player is required to have a copy of the game, but this results in players having no choice of their monster and limited levels to pick from. The multi-pack mode requires all players to have their own copies of the game, but with no limitations for multiplayer action. Unfortunately, if playing with the GameCube Game Boy player, additional controllers cannot be substituted for Game Boy Advances, so there is no multiplayer on a single screen. The custom mode allows a single player to create their own single round monster battles and determine how many monsters will participate, which specific monsters, the location and difficulty level of each computer controlled monster for some added challenge and practice. Interestingly, as with previous games on this list, the Japanese version has multiple differences compared to the US and PAL region versions. These include alternate versions of several monsters such as Godzilla and Mothra. Mechagodzilla, though, had been replaced entirely with Kiryu. This is largely due to the Japanese version wanting to tie in with the upcoming film Godzilla Tokyo SOS. The Japanese version also expanded on the story mode by offering 3 different modes of play for it. I have to say, from a single player perspective, this game doesn't have a whole lot to keep me coming back. As much as I enjoy the quirky graphics and I do have fun playing it, I feel this game is really hurt by its simple gameplay, limited roster of only 6 monsters, 0 unlockables, and it only takes about 20 to 30 minutes to complete a single playthrough, even with a few deaths. So essentially, you can see everything the game has to offer in the space of a couple of hours. This game feels much better suited to the time in which it sprang, at a sleepover with 4 friends in the early 2000s. And if all those friends had Game Boy Advances, it would have been totally epic to have a 4-player free-for-all or team deathmatch. But sadly, those days, along with the Game Boy Advance, are past. And now we move on to Godzilla Domination's bigger, badder brother, Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee. Released a month before Domination in the same year of 2002, this first arrived on Nintendo GameCube and then the Microsoft Xbox a year later. Often abbreviated as Godzilla Damn, this is the first entry in what is referred to as the Pipeworks trilogy of Godzilla games, all of which feature the same gameplay of being a 3D asymmetric fighting brawler. Now this is a Godzilla game. Although it wasn't the first 3D Godzilla game, it was my first 3D Godzilla game, and I was totally blown away by the graphics, gameplay, and especially the roster. Upon starting the game, players get to see an awesome intro trailer showcasing the gameplay and cinematic style of the game, and it definitely starts to whet one's appetite for the action ahead. The main menu offers several different game mode options, with Adventure being the main story mode. And it's that old familiar story too, with a group of aliens called the Vortak invading Earth, taking control of Earth's monsters, demanding surrender of the planet, with one monster breaking free and being Earth's only hope, blah blah blah. You know the story by now. Depending on the version you play, the roster consists of 11 to 12 playable monsters, which is a huge number compared to previous titles. However, you only have access to 3 monsters at the beginning, and no, the rest aren't locked behind a deluxe upgrade, subscription, or paid DLC. They're locked behind playing the game, as it always should be. You unlocked additional monsters by beating the game with certain other monsters, not only giving the game longevity and replay value, but allowing the player to really get to experience each of the monsters and find their favorite go-to monster. Mine was Rodan. The only downside about the unlocking method of Damn is that if you're wanting to unlock a particular monster, it may require you to beat the game multiple times with specific monsters. For example, to unlock Augur, it requires finishing the game with every single other monster and then beating it with Godzilla 2000 a second time on a certain difficulty before he becomes available. After selecting a monster, the player is dropped into a series of 1 versus 1 matches against other monsters in various levels. The levels consist mostly of cityscapes that are sectioned off by large green energy barrier looking walls that deal damage to a monster if they make contact with it. Most levels are based on actual cities, and some cities have multiple different levels as well as day and night versions. The levels can feature sections of waterways, docks, airports, and there are even levels set on Monster Island and the Vortak mothership. Gameplay is similar to Domination, with the player being able to wander around a large arena that features destructible environments, engage enemy monsters, and use a variety of standard and special attacks. It even has power-ups. The implementation, however, is vastly different, and Destroy All Monsters Melee does a fantastic job of bringing these characters to life in 3D and making you feel like you're locked in epic monster battles, with cities fast becoming both collateral damage and ammunition. The controls in this game do feel clunky and heavy, with monsters not being quick to maneuver or turn around, but this only adds to the aesthetic of the game and helps you feel like you are moving a giant monster around. Each monster has a health and energy bar and attack with their own unique set of standard and special attacks. Monsters are also able to block incoming attacks and projectiles, and in addition to walking, they can also run to navigate levels faster or close and widen the gap between opponents, and they can even jump and clear small buildings. Each monster also has their own stats for attack, defense, speed, and weapon capability. However, this information is nowhere present in the game or made obvious. It is located in the manual for the Xbox version, but not the GameCube version, so players may need to take the time through gameplay or an internet search to figure out what each monster is best suited to. Standard attacks are either light or heavy, but come in a variety of forms, from clawing, swiping, biting, headbutting, tail whipping, and stomping, depending on your monster. Certain attacks can also flow into others, allowing players to form combos. Monsters are also able to not only pick up certain middle-sized buildings and hurl them at their opponents, but they can also pick up their opponents and do a throw attack or simply throw them across the map. It's amazing how satisfying it can be to throw an enemy into a large building, which then crumbles on top of them, dealing extra damage, and then once they get back up, they find themselves immediately eating an office building sandwich and getting knocked back down again. Whilst you can deliver combos or button mash to an extent, environmental awareness is also important, with the player needing to be aware of their surroundings, as one wrong move can open you up to large heavy hitting combo from your opponent, or they could find themselves amongst plenty of buildings with which to lob right at you. Even when knocked down, it isn't hopeless, as when you're lying on the ground, each monster has the ability to roll away or attack should their opponent get too close. Special attacks are also unique to each monster, and most consist of a ranged energy-based beam attack. Each monster's energy bar will automatically yet slowly fill throughout the match. As it fills, players can use their energy to charge a high damage focused beam attack that does more damage the longer the beam goes on for. Or they can fire quick projectiles that use a portion of their energy and is a good method of interrupting another monster's attacks. Some monsters' special attacks are incorporated into their standard attacks, such as Destroyer's Horn Attack, and others like Mechagodzilla and Mecha King Ghidorah have additional attacks such as the ability to fire missiles. Due to the 3D nature of the game, an auto-aiming feature was implemented where monsters lock onto each other. Whilst this certainly helps with making sure your hits are on target during combat, it can be infuriating when you're wanting to get to a power-up or maneuver to a specific place in the arena and you're stuck maneuvering your monster sideways or backwards. On the plus side, however, when running, monsters usually disengage the lock on their opponents until they stop. During battles, monster versus monster fights aren't the only thing happening. Human military units are also present on the battlefield and generally attack the monster that is causing the most destruction. These military units, which consist of tanks, helicopters, and mazes, do very minimal damage, and often players might not even notice they are there while they're busy duking it out with another monster. However, their damage can add up, and a few shots can cause an unlucky monster to lose their final units of health. The biggest impact from these units though comes from the mazes, as they're capable of freezing a monster dead in its tracks, leaving it completely vulnerable to opponents for a short period of time. Not fun when you get targeted mid close quarters combat with the opposition. There are also UFOs which can appear and fire at monsters or potentially drop power-up items. Speaking of power-ups, there are 5 you can pick up during battles, with most being able to turn the tide of a battle. However, these pickups don't stay present for very long and most randomly spawn throughout the arena. As you'd expect, there is the full energy power-up that fully restores a monster's energy bar and increases the recharge rate for a short duration. There is also the health pickup, which restores a decent amount of health that can keep you from an untimely defeat, and often monsters will try beat each other to this all-important life-saving pickup. Then there is the Rage power-up. Upon collecting this, a monster will enter Rage mode, and for a short duration their attacks will do increased damage. The monster will also be able to unleash their Rage attack, a unique special move that does decent knockback damage to all monsters within the radius of a user. During adventure or survival mode on medium or high difficulties, a player might come across the Atari pickup, and whilst it won't grant any benefits in match, it actually unlocks a piece of artwork in the gallery section of the main game menu. The last pickup a player can collect is the Mothra Airstrike pickup. When a monster collects this, Mothra will appear in-game and for a short period of time will fly around and attack the opponent nearest you. Mothra can even be hit with beam attacks to make her hasten her departure. And Mothra isn't the only monster that makes a cameo appearance in this game. Randomly during matches, Hedorah, the smog monster, can spawn and will fly around releasing its pollution gas. Monsters caught in its path will struggle to recharge their energy bar, but largely, the smog monster seems quite ineffectual and easily avoided, mostly even barely noticed. The final fight of adventure mode always consists of a battle aboard the Vortak mothership and usually against Mechagodzilla 2, otherwise it's against Mecha King Ghidorah. Other game modes include Destruction mode, which involves destroying as much of the city as possible in a time limit to get a score. Versus mode, a 1 vs 1 battle mode for 2 players or versing the CPU. Team battle mode, where players battle it out in teams of 2 or 3. Survival mode, a last monster standing mode where you fight monster after monster until you're defeated. And the all-important melee mode, which is the standard multiplayer battle mode that fulfilled our heart's desire of allowing us to have up to 4 monsters battling it out at the same time, which makes this the first Godzilla game to do so. The other thing worth noting is in its initial release, this game also continued the tradition of the Japanese version featuring alterations the North American and PAL GameCube versions didn't have, as the Japanese version featured Kiryu, who replaced Mechagodzilla 2. As always, this was due to the latest movie, Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, being released only in Japan at the time. However, with the Xbox version of the game coming out a year later, Kiryu was incorporated into it alongside Mechagodzilla 2, making this the version to own and thus increasing its price on the secondary market. Godzilla Dam is a really good fighting game and fantastic Godzilla game that has a lot to offer fans of the Kaijuu genre. Being able to have 4 monsters on screen at once duking it out in amazing 3D visuals was mind-blowing and made for really awesome sleepovers and hangouts. And I have to bring special attention to the game's voice announcer. He delivers every line of dialogue with epic gravitas. I mean, just listen to how he pronounces every monster's name. It just really adds to the experience.
Godzilla 90. Megalon. King Ghidorah. Destroyer. Mecha Ghidorah. Monsters. Fight.
It is one of my favorites for sure, and my one slight disappointment is that considering her popularity, Mothra being relegated to a cameo just didn't feel right. Whether this was due to budget, time, or complexity constraints is anybody's guess. Godzilla Dam is often hailed as one of the best Godzilla games, if not the best, and for good reason. It's damn good. Sorry, had to throw that in there. It was a labour of love by the developers that really wanted to make a great Godzilla game where players were able to create their own great giant monster mashups. In fact, it was such a labour of love, they went on to do it 2 more times. Enter the sequel, Godzilla Save the Earth. Released 2 years later in 2004, the second entry in the Pipeworks trilogy made it to the Xbox and PlayStation 2, with no release on a Nintendo console unlike the previous game. This game features some major changes from its predecessor, including its overall presentation. Starting with the main menu, players will notice Adventure Mode has been renamed Action. Versus, Melee, Survival and Gallery modes still remain, and players will quickly notice the presence of a Challenges mode and a content store that's simply named Purchase Items. One feature that hasn't changed, and you guessed it, the story. Save the Earth features the exact same story as the previous game, with the Vortak returning, mind controlling all the monsters again, and one breaking free of that control. Upon entering Action Mode, players are greeted with a different looking monster select screen. This time around, the monster stats are in full view and also include type advantages and weaknesses. Players will also note there is a starting selection of 6 monsters here. Gameplay overall is still relatively unchanged as far as experience goes. If you've played Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee before or seen its segment in this video, then you know what to expect, as players again proceed through a series of 1 versus 1 battles in various arenas, culminating in a fight aboard the Vortak mothership. There are some key differences though. Firstly, compared to Dam, the gameplay here is meant to be exactly the same. However, to me it felt slightly sped up and the controls felt lighter, which resulted in monsters feeling like they were able to maneuver and respond faster in combat. And normally this wouldn't be any kind of issue, and it isn't. But the lighter and faster controls did detract from that feeling of playing a giant lumbering monster. Upon winning a battle, players are shown a results screen that offers details about the match that was just played, like how many monsters were defeated, the difficulty, how quickly it was completed, and how many military units and UFOs were destroyed. The stats are tallied up and the player is given points based on the outcomes. It's these points that become the currency used in the store to purchase content such as additional monsters, levels, and art. There are also a number of new additions to gameplay now, and that includes monsters finally being able to have beam clashes. This is triggered when 2 monsters' charged beam attacks lock together when fired at the same time, and in a rock paper scissors style format, players press buttons to send coloured pulses down their beam based on the colour of the opponent's beam. For instance, if the opponent's beam is blue, then the player needs to send a red pulse. Keeping in mind though, the opponent can also change the colour of their beam, forcing the player to adjust quickly. If you get the right combinations, the opponent eventually gets hit with the damage of the attack. Likewise, you get the damage if you fail too often. Although it might not seem it, it's a convoluted mess of a system that can be over quicker than it starts, and in the frantic hustle of it all, unless you're well practiced, it's super easy to screw up. The game doesn't even take the time to explain it to you, and it's also not even written in the manual. I had to consult the internet to figure this thing out. Level design in Save the Earth has certainly improved, as arenas aren't simply the populated flat areas as they were in Dam. Now arenas and cities have elevations, hill ranges, slopes and inclines, making for some interesting and varied gameplay, as some attacks will have a harder or easier time landing based on the elevation of monsters. Like in Godzilla Domination, 2 minigame bonus stages are sprinkled in amongst the fighting stages of the story mode. The difference though is the minigames are randomly selected, as Godzilla Save the Earth features many different minigames. Power-ups are still present in Save the Earth, albeit with a new look. Health and energy may look different, but function the same as they did in Dam. The Atari pickup, however, its icon's function has been reassigned as art for the gallery gets unlocked in the store. Now the Atari icon represents the Airstrike power-up, and once collected, either Batra or the Super X3 will appear and instantly bombard the opposition from the air, making it essentially Save the Earth's version of the Mothra Airstrike from Dam. Save the Earth also features a new type of pickup, the G cells. Short for Godzilla cells, there are 5 of these hidden throughout each normal level of action mode and look like green cylinders. These grant significant bonus points for each one you collect by the end of the level, and as with any other pickup, the player isn't the only one who can collect these, as the opposing monster can also claim them, preventing the player from getting the extra points from that G cell. Aside from the gameplay changes, there are new features in the game. The monster selection has ballooned from 12 playable monsters in Dam to 18 in Save the Earth, with the thankful addition of Mothra in both her Lava and Imago forms. There is also the new addition of Challenges mode, which features 12 different minigames, and these games are what Action mode will randomly select 2 of during a playthrough. The challenges have players trying to complete specific objectives in set time limits or to a certain amount. Some challenges work well and can be fun to play, especially with other people, but the majority of challenges are just frustrating, clunky, and so damn hard to control or work with. I imagine it would be easier to perform open heart surgery with the hiccups. For example, the Monster Bowling Challenge requires your monster using large boulders to directly hit 3 opposing monsters that are on the other side of a river within a 30-second period. These monsters aren't designed with fine motor skills in mind, and simply maneuvering them into the right distance and facing can be incredibly frustrating. Oh, and did I mention, while you're trying to do all that, the opposing monsters are also throwing boulders at the player. I see what they were going for here, to add variety to the game and make it seem like a superior upgrade to Godzilla Dam, and there can definitely be some fun to be had with the plethora of challenges on offer. However, most are just annoying and frustrating experiences, and I can't help but wish they put more effort into improving the game itself than implementing so many minigames. Strangely enough, graphically, Save the Earth looks a bit of a step backwards from Dam, with monster details not being as sharp or clear to make out. Interestingly, upon looking into this game's development, one might be surprised to find a great deal of work and features were actually cut from the final product. This includes not just levels and additional monsters, but even story elements and cutscenes were left out. I guess that's why they recycled the exact same story from the previous game. This was likely due to Atari wanting to get the game out to coincide with the release of Godzilla Final Wars, the last Toho Godzilla movie we'd see until Shin Godzilla 12 years later. The store and point system for unlocking content is a welcome feature, as it allows players to work towards unlocking their favourite monsters sooner as opposed to in Dam. The 5 G cells in each level of the story mode, however, feel like a huge distraction. Because collecting the 5 in each level grants decent points for purchasing content, the story mode fights become less focused on monster battles and more focused on a treasure hunt for the G cells, with the opposing monster simply being a hindrance to this task. This just doesn't feel right and detracts from the central point of the game, which is monsters battling. Of course, a player can choose to ignore the G cells to focus on the fight, but then you have to deal with that annoying voice in your head mid-fight that tells you it's right there, 2 blocks down waiting for you, and it and all its friends will bring us one step closer to getting Space Godzilla. So who could resist? Godzilla Save the Earth is a good Godzilla game, and depending on who you ask, some will argue it is the best Godzilla game, often in contention with Godzilla Dam. The expansion of the roster really shines for me with this entry, as more monsters adds more variety and replay value. Now for the final and most controversial entry in the Pipeworks trilogy, Godzilla Unleashed. Released in 2007 for the Nintendo Wii and PlayStation 2, both versions feature major differences from each other, and strangely, neither version saw a release in Japan, the home of Godzilla himself. This third entry yet again features some drastic changes from the previous 2 entries in the series. Instantly noticeable is the main menu is quite basic, with only 3 game modes: Story, Brawl and Training. The store makes its return, and of course the option setting is there. Gone are previous modes such as Destruction and Survival modes. Even the challenges from Save the Earth are no longer here. Training and Story modes are pretty self-explanatory, whilst Brawl mode is the custom match mode that allows up to 4 players to set the rules of a match where combating monsters, either player or CPU controlled, are competing for knockouts or points. Surprisingly, both the storyline and the story mode in this game are different to that of Dam and Save the Earth. About bloody time! Here, the storyline is about a meteor shower colliding with Earth, which has resulted in climate changes and numerous crystals sprouting forth around the planet, and everyone wants them. Some monsters wish to destroy these crystals, others seek to use their power to become the most powerful monster on the planet, and even the Vortak aliens seeking to use the crystals to power their conquering of Earth. The story mode itself is no longer a series of 1 versus 1 monster battles. Instead, it's more of a campaign that takes place over 20 days or matches. The player is presented with a map of the planet with several spots on the map indicating a level, allowing the player to choose where they want to battle and how they wish to progress through the campaign. When selecting a spot, the player is given some brief details on what is happening at that location and what monsters they can expect to encounter. That's right, I said monsters, plural, meaning some matches will consist of multiple monsters facing off. Some levels feature the player facing off against a mini-boss such as the Atragon, a super crystal charged monster, and even a crystal tower that fires at the player. After a match, the previous level options might not be available, but some new ones may have sprouted forth. And as you might have guessed, the outcomes of some levels can result in others being available or not being available. This really adds to the replay value of the game, as your experiences can be different with each playthrough, even if you picked the same monster. Godzilla Unleashed features a roster of 26 monsters for the Wii version and 20 monsters for the PS2 version, and for the first time in the trilogy, there are new original monsters present here too, with the likes of Crystalak and Obsidius. In this game, monsters have been divided into 4 distinct factions: the Earth Defenders, the Global Defense Force, which are the humans, mutants, and aliens. The game also features alliances, with the player initially only being allied with their monster's own faction. However, as the game progresses, the player makes choices that impact their relationships with all the factions. For instance, if the player decides to destroy human buildings, their standing with the Global Defense Force will decrease, but it may improve with the alien and mutant factions. Interestingly, if the player's standing with any faction is above 70%, monsters from that faction will view the player as an ally and not attack. A common occurrence in this game is to be put into matches with opposing monsters, and maybe one or two of them can just happen to be allies that help you out in the fight. This can also sometimes result in the funny situation of a player entering a match and the only opposing monsters are actually from allied factions. In this circumstance, all the player needs to do is wait out the clock to a certain point before the match automatically ends in their favour. There are 3 different endings in this game in all, and they are mostly dependent on the monster's faction and choices made during the campaign. So what else is different from the previous 2 games? Well, the beam clashes have definitely improved since the previous game. Instead of a rock, paper, scissors style format, now when a beam clash starts, a pulse will appear in the middle of the beams and move towards either player. It is up to each player to hit the pulse just before it reaches them in order to send it back to the other monster. Should a monster fail and to hit the pulse back, they take the full force of the attack. So essentially, the monsters take a time out from fighting to have a not so nice and friendly game of Godzilla tennis. Another major change is Rage mode, which has been replaced with a state called Critical Mass. When monsters destroy crystals, they begin filling a critical meter. Once the meter is full, the monsters enter critical mass, increasing their size and donning a look similar to Burning Godzilla from Godzilla vs. Destroyer. And while in this state, the monster deals significant damage, but at the cost of its defense. Additionally, throughout the game, the players may encounter monsters that are sporting colorful glows. These monsters are under the unique influence of the 7 Power Surge crystals that are in the game. Each crystal has a different effect, and the player has the choice of removing the crystal's influence over the opposing monster by destroying the crystals around the level, or the player can collect the crystal themselves by defeating the opposing monster while they glow with that crystal's energy. After taking the crystal for themselves, this allows the player to trigger that crystal's ability once per level for 30 seconds. As I said before, there are 2 distinct versions of this game. 3 if you include the Nintendo DS version, but we aren't talking about that one. Originally, this game was intended to be a Nintendo Wii exclusive, and interestingly, the PS2 version is essentially an updated version of a PSP port of Save the Earth that got released a few days earlier. The Wii version sports the forced motion controls that are common with Nintendo Wii titles, and of course it doesn't support the classic controller. So that means if you want your monster to simply pick up the opposing monster and throw them, you have to look like a reject from Hogwarts that's being cattle prodded while casting a spell. The PS2 version doesn't have this issue, which would normally mean the PS2 version is superior, but sadly that's its only strength compared to the Wii version. There are 26 monsters in the Wii version and only 20 in the PS2 version. However, the PS2 version features Batra, who is exclusive and not present in the Wii version. Unfortunately though, Batra isn't completely its own monster, as it's simply a reskinned version of Mothra that just happens to feature different animations and sounds, but it has the exact same stats, ability, and feel. Gigan is present in both versions, however the Wii version features his Millennium era look and the PS2 version features his classic Showa era look. Other differences include the health bars. On Nintendo Wii, each monster has multiple health bars. that require heavy impact hits or thrown objects when they're diminished in order to remove the current bar and continue to whittle down the monster's next health bar. The PS2 version features the same singular health bar that is in Save the Earth. This game really struggled in development, as evidenced with the not so responsive Wii motion controls and the inferiority of the PS2 version. It also had a lot of content cut out, such as more story content and consequences for failing missions that carry on into the story. Whilst it does have its shortcomings and some frustrations with controls, I found it to be my preferred entry in the Pipeworks trilogy, as it features the largest roster of the trilogy, has a greatly improved story mode with multi-monster fights and alliances. It even has environments that are completely altered based on the crystal event that's occurring, like the Sydney Opera House being surrounded with ice. It also has multiple endings. Sure, I did miss the other game modes that are not present here, but to be honest, I barely played those. I spent most of my time in the other games with their story and versus modes, and that's where this game chose to put its attention. And lastly, we have Godzilla on PlayStation 4. Released in 2015 for PlayStation 4, this version is actually a Western port of the Japanese game Godzilla vs., which itself is an upgraded version of the Japanese game Godzilla on PlayStation 3, which was also ported to Western countries for PlayStation 3, but kept the same name. Confused? Well, I sure as hell am. Straight from the opening cinematic, this game looks epic! Much like Destroy All Monsters Melee, but with a fresh coat of paint and some new additions. However, unlike the brawler fighting game, which was damn, Godzilla PS4 is actually more a Godzilla simulator, and a great one at that. The story here is that since the original Godzilla's attack in 1954, humans have discovered and been harnessing his G energy for the last 60 years through the use of G energy generators. Jumping forward to modern day, Godzilla appears again and is hell-bent on destroying these generators and absorbing all the G energy. Other monsters appear and are each drawn to Godzilla and his ever-increasing energy levels. This game features several different game modes, and not all of them are self-explanatory. The campaign, called God of Destruction mode, see what I mean, sees the player, whom initially starts with Godzilla, progressing through a series of 10 levels which are depicted by branching paths, with the top levels being easier than the bottom levels. Each level has the player's monster dropped into a large cityscape or environment that is littered with buildings and military units which attack the player once close enough. Levels mostly consist of the one objective: destroy all the G energy generators. The generators are all in fixed positions in each level and are guarded by military, and they even have their own defensive barriers. However, that's not all that is awaiting Godzilla. Other monsters may start or arrive partway into a level, resulting in an extra challenge or hindrance to Godzilla's task. After beating a level, the player is rewarded with parts or cells of the monsters they defeated, which can be used in evolution mode. More on that later. They're also then able to choose their next level from two possible choices, and depending on the player's level selection, the overall difficulty can be adjusted between easier and harder. After beating God of Destruction mode for the first time, the mode opens up to allow the player to go through it with any unlocked monster as either an invader or defender. This adds a tremendous amount of replay value to the game. Players will notice there is a lot going on with the heads-up display, and it has several features of note. The disaster level indicates the strength of the military units, and each time it fills, an in-game cutscene that is very reminiscent of the films plays to indicate the disaster level is increased and additional upgraded units will spawn on the map and attack the player. The destruction rate indicates the percentage of building objects in the level that have been destroyed. The height meter is something new for me in a Godzilla game, as Godzilla starts at 50 meters tall, and as he absorbs G energy that comes from destroying objects, military units, monsters, and generators, he slowly increases in size and the damage he inflicts within the campaign. This is a key component of gameplay in Godzilla PS4, as harder and more difficult levels often involve having to face monsters that are much larger and more damaging than the player. The Fury meter represents the monster's combo counter, and the higher this number, the more G energy the monster will absorb when defeating things, and thus allowing the monster to increase its size quicker. Controls wise, this game takes some getting used to. Movement is slow, controls feel heavy, clunky, and even sometimes counterintuitive. For example, just simply turning your monster either left or right requires use of the shoulder buttons rather than the expected joystick. Attacks consist of some pretty basic light and heavy combos, charge attacks, and special attacks. Additionally, monsters are also able to roar, which if followed by a special attack mid-roar, the monster does a stronger version of that attack. Also, monsters have a dodge technique, which is definitely one players want to regularly employ, particularly for tougher battles, as the dodge takes the form of a moment of invulnerability and can stagger or interrupt an opposing monster's attacks, creating some much needed breathing space for the player. Monsters here feel hard to maneuver and plod along not getting anywhere fast, which is exactly what you want in a kaiju video game. It feels like a Godzilla movie. Monsters are dishing out their signature techniques and moves without having a comical sense of maneuverability. But that's not to say it's without comedy, as several iconic moments from the movies can be replicated within the game. Speaking to gameplay, Godzilla is designed to give the player a cinematic-like experience that evokes the style of the movies, but without bogging the gameplay with too many interruptions. And cutscenes play as new threats emerge. The music itself is straight from the films, and there are even secret monster encounters that attempt to replicate iconic monster battles from the films. Like this match between Godzilla 1964 and two Mothra Lava, which is an homage to the film Mothra vs Godzilla, and it's triggered when the player beats God of Destruction mode, with Godzilla 64 being over 100 meters tall. There are several hidden encounters like this, which really shows a love and appreciation for the franchise. As for other game modes, King of Kaijuu is a monster battle mode where the player is trying to beat 6 stages that each feature a random monster. These monsters get progressively more challenging as the player beats each stage. Versus mode is the game's player versus player multiplayer mode. However, much to its detriment, it only allows for online multiplayer and no local couch split screen multiplayer. Evolution mode, as I mentioned earlier, is not so much a game mode as it is a store. Here the player is able to unlock additional monsters and spend their acquired monster cells and parts to upgrade their monsters and purchase figures for use in diorama mode. Each upgrade for each monster requires G energy as well as cells or parts from specific monsters. Once the player has those, they can purchase that upgrade and they will require a new set of resources for the next upgrade. Unfortunately, most monsters have a generic set of upgrades based on allowing them to store additional energy attack bars and increase their recharge speed of their energy, and that's it. A few Godzillas, however, have a much expanded upgrade tree and are even able to unlock additional moves or alternate between different versions of his iconic beam attack. Diorama mode is effectively a photography studio where players get to create their own battle scenes using set pieces and the various figures of monsters they've purchased through the respective monsters' evolution tree. The level of customization is really good, and one could spend hours upon hours just setting up various scenes, and that's not including the amount of time it would take to unlock all the figures in the evolution mode. After players have made their dioramas, they're able to save them and use the mode to take photos of them. This is a great game, and I thoroughly enjoy playing it and going through the campaign with all the different monsters. However, it's not without its faults, and I have 3 major gripes with this game. Most egregiously is the lack of local multiplayer. Sadly, I've never experienced this game from a player versus player standpoint, as I don't have an online PlayStation subscription that would be required to play multiplayer. But even if I did, I doubt I'd be lucky enough to find other people still playing this game online. Secondly, the evolution trees for the majority of monsters are disappointing. As I stated earlier, other than a few Godzillas, no other monsters have additional or alternate attacks, and their only upgrades are more energy bars, faster energy recharge, and diorama figures. It's a huge shame that despite having a huge and varied roster, none of the other monsters receive the love and attention as the game's namesake. And lastly, it's grindy as hell! Remember when I said after defeating monsters in the story mode, you gain some parts of that monster to use in the evolution mode? Well, typically you'll only gain one or a few of those pieces, and each monster in the game requires multiple parts from every monster to be able to fully unlock all upgrades. And some monsters such as Destroyer and especially Jet Jaguar are really hard to come by or defeat. So to unlock everything for everyone, you're looking at multiple hundreds of hours of gaming. Gripes aside, if it were more affordable on the secondary market, I'd highly recommend Godzilla fans picking up a copy, since it's very obvious this was made for the fans by fans. Its attention to detail towards emulating the films is fantastic, and it's the closest thing I've experienced to playing out the Godzilla movies in an actual video game. And that marks the conclusion of my review on the Godzilla games in my collection. Some of these have held up pretty well over the years, and there are a few here that I keep coming back to time and time again. None perfect, but Godzilla never seems to garner a large budget, team or rigorous support when it comes to video games. So what would be my top 3 Godzilla games? Controversial to say the least, as I'm not one to conform to popular belief, and it all comes down to what games I get the most out of. So before I wrap up, let's take a look at my top 3 Godzilla games from the ones we've seen here and why they're in my top 3. Number 3. Godzilla Monster of Monsters, NES. When I want to get my 2D Godzilla fix, this is the one I turn to. Graphically or gameplay wise, it might not be the best 2D Godzilla game, but it's the one that gives me the most enjoyment for the longest time. Others either have massive difficulties or gameplay mechanics I just don't like, or they're too short. Godzilla NES ticks a lot of boxes, especially with its mix of multiple gaming genres that just work really well together. It's great as a co-op game, and it isn't punishing but challenging. It was also made with a lot of love for the franchise and its numerous monsters and enemies that are taken from films. Number 2. Godzilla Unleashed Wii. Yes, you heard me correctly. Out of the Pipeworks trilogy, the most universally despised one is actually my favourite of the 3. Whilst Destroy All Monsters Melee is a solid game gameplay wise, its level design, campaign and roster of 12 I find rather lacking. Save the Earth, while it has an improved roster and level design, its focus on the challenges, which are barely playable, took away from refining the rest of the gameplay. Unleashed, however, has a massive roster, more robust campaign mode, and despite its forced motion controls, it's still playable without being too frustrating, but importantly it has a lot more to offer in replay value than the previous entries. It's also the one I turn to when I need to scratch the Godzilla fighting game itch. And lastly, number 1. Godzilla PS4. Yes, absolutely it would be this one. Although not well received by fans who were expecting another fighting game similar to the Pipeworks trilogy, I love that this game tries a different approach and puts more into actually putting you into the role of those monsters. Despite its lack of local multiplayer, significant monster upgrades, and super grindy nature, it's still a lot of fun for a single player game. I love the variety of levels and the ability to carve out your own path to the end, and especially the secret monster encounters reminiscent of the films. Out of all the games on this list, this is the one that feels like Godzilla the most. Thanks for watching, take care, and I hope you'll join me on the next one.